Mark your calendars, everybody. The ACC has released the 2025 schedule, and we're going to show it to you right here for the Miami Hurricanes. 8 home games, 4 road games. David, what jumps out to me initially, we're going to get into this, kind of what stands out to us. And look, the over-under for this team right now, according to DraftKings, 9.5 wins. But what stands out to me is those rivalry games early on in the season. Notre Dame to start it off right there, August 31st. And then a few games later, you get Florida at home and then Florida State after the bye week. So three of your top three rivals in the first 5 games of the season. Certainly the offseason, whenever we talk about the opener, when we talk about off-season workouts and all of this stuff, there's that clear motivation when you have a top team to start off the season. We've been around this program a long time. They talk a lot about who they face in the opener, kind of getting ready for that. Last year, Miami came out of the gate with that big win against Florida, kind of set the tone, starting out 9-0 for this team. So Notre Dame, coming off that national championship game appearance, and then the Florida State, they've not beaten these three teams. They obviously don't play them, but the last time they beat all three was 1987 during a championship season. So that's what stands out to me with the schedule.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting first 2 months of the schedule when you look at, like you said, the non-conference portion in the first month is interesting. Second month is interesting to me because you got 2 bye weeks kind of happening in that second sector of the season, and Miami doesn't leave the state of Florida until November 1st, a trip to SMU. So they have an away game at Florida State in October. But besides that, Miami's playing all their games inside the state of Florida for the first 2 months. They're gonna have some wars, right, in those first 5 games when you got, like you're saying, Notre Dame, Florida State. Those are gonna be big physical games. Miami has 2 bye weeks mixed in there, and they don't leave the state of Florida. So I am curious how that, whether or not it helps Miami finish strong in the month of November and have some gas in the tank for that last stretch.
You touched on not going when you said that initially to me. It's so surprising, and I know last year, even when they played the road games, they were at Florida, at USF. And look, Miami's going to play USF that third game, part of that 4 game stretch to begin the season at home. USF is always interesting to me. I think if you want to forecast, maybe that's a team to pay attention to as an ACC ad in the future. So I think it's great Miami has them on the schedule. But yeah, you mentioned that, and that's what's so interesting with the schedule. The double bye kind of surrounding that Florida State game before and after. And then one of the things that's so interesting to me is inside the ACC schedule, and putting up the graphic here with Mario Cristobal with what he's done in the first half of the ACC schedule and then the second half. So both in 22 and 23 started off 2-2 in the first 4 games, and then 1-3 in that second half. And then, as we remember last year, 4-0 in that first half, and then 2-2 in the second half. So each year he's had a worse record in the second half. And I think for Miami, clearly, if they want to get to the ACC championship game, they've got to put together 2 strong first halves. And as we saw last year with this expanded, teams in the ACC, it's going to take 7-1 essentially. That has to be the goal. The 8-0, 7-1, that'll get you in. And I think that's what it's going to take. And certainly, as we saw last year, if the top teams aren't facing each other, it's hard to find losses for those top teams. So I think that's going to be key for Miami. Even when you look at it, David, Louisville, certainly with their season that they had last year and how they finished 5-1 in their final 6, Miller Moss coming in with what they did, and seeing them and SMU, certainly a lot of respect for that program. 11 wins, won the AAC before moving over to the ACC last year and the college football playoff. So I think those two obviously stand out with the rivalry game. But that back 4, nothing particularly stands out with it. Syracuse deserves a lot of respect for what they did to Miami last year, but the change in quarterback will be different. But those final 4, I think that'll certainly be key for Miami, and they've got to be much better in the second half.
Yeah, I think that the final game of the year against Pittsburgh at Pittsburgh is going to be probably more interesting than Miami fans realize at this point, right? I think Pittsburgh, they got off to a hot start last year. They definitely fizzled at the end when they had some quarterback injuries to Eli Holstein, but they return a lot of talent that should allow them to build year over year. They return Holstein, they return Desmond Reed, who accounted for 1,500 yards of offense from the running back position. They have one of the better linebackers in the country in Kyle Lewis. So they have some guys, and Pat Narduzzi does a good job of putting together what he has to work with and getting the most out of those guys. So last year we saw where Miami couldn't finish strong in the final week of the regular season at Syracuse. I think Pittsburgh's also going to be a tough test there. When you look at this schedule in general, there are you, you there are a lot of opponents that I think command respect. I think 9 of the 11 FBS teams on the schedule went bowling last year, and one of the ones that didn't is Florida State. I promise you, they will not go 2-10 in 2025. I would assume they will be a bowl eligible team this year, so they will be improved. And so it's going to be a real schedule. It'll be interesting to see, the teams that had success last year, like Syracuse, SMU, they hit that 10-win mark. Can they sustain it? That same question is there for Miami as well. But it's an interesting schedule. I think we talk about navigating the ACC. Look, Florida, Notre Dame, those games are important, right? You, of course, want to win those. But I think ultimately, to get to the college football playoff in this expanded 12-team format, you got to get to Charlotte. And like you said, you got to go 7-1. Those Florida and Notre Dame games are water cooler games, and they matter. You want to be water cooler champions, right? But really, the goal is to be ACC champions. And to do that, you got to follow that Clemson path we saw last year, where yes, they lost SEC games to Georgia and South Carolina, but they went 7-1 in the ACC, and that put them in a position to then go win the ACC championship against SMU.
And when you're saying that, I still think about, and I think they did make steps last year, obviously from the
Yeah,
from the first 2 years. But Mario talks about it each and every week, going 1-0, and I really think that I understand that's coach speak, and I understand we hear that quite a bit. But I think it definitely permeated with the team for the most part. I think that type of mentality is going to be so key to your point, and finding ways to, if it doesn't look good, or if they, like last year they had some close wins. What if they come up short? Losses cannot, as you mentioned with Clemson, it didn't look good against Georgia. It wasn't just a loss; it didn't look good. But losses, singular losses, cannot derail your season. In the totality of it. And I think we've seen that so much at Miami, and one loss becomes two or three, whatever, for the reasons. And I think they just have to do a much better job. But certainly the momentum, if they can gain those momentum against Notre Dame, give them confidence. And I know it's a confident group. We always talk about, they always feel like they have the best. They think they have the best team, the best units. And I think getting actual results, I think starting off with Notre Dame, that would certainly be a big one, even though Notre Dame, that was a little bit of transition with their quarterback situation, but, they're bringing back plenty of guys. That would be interesting, certainly that game. But the Florida game, it touched on Louisville with how they finished. Florida with how they finished, winning their final 4 games. So it's not just, that's what makes this schedule interesting. It's not just the Syracuse and SMUs that add to it with their 10 plus win seasons. You've got these other programs like a Louisville and Florida who finished hot, and Notre Dame obviously with their hot run as well. So, and of course, Florida State, it's a rivalry game. Not expecting them to have the season that they had a year ago. And I think it's just a really interesting schedule with a lot of tests early on. And it will be interesting to see if this team can get to can they get to the championship game? That was such a focal point last year, and obviously to do that, improving the defense, making sure the offense is on point, replacing key guys at the receiver position will be important as well.
yeah, I think I want to drill down on this point, right? Because you talk about the over/under that DraftKings has said, or various betting sites have said, of 9.5, right? Same last year for Miami, 9.5.
Mhm.
They hit the over on that, 10-2. 10-win seasons lately have been rare, and so that should be celebrated for Miami. But I think, as a fan base, as we get used to this new reality of a 17-team ACC and a 12-team college football playoff, there needs to be an understanding of, honestly, like, not all 10-2s are created equal. And it is more important, for example, to go 2-2 in your non-conference and then undefeated in ACC play. That is a better 10-2 because it allows you to get to Charlotte than it would be to go 4-0 in non-conference and then 6-2 in ACC play, because you're probably on the bubble then, and probably going to be left out in a 17 team league where you, like you said, you've got to go at least 7-1. So 10-2 seasons are great, but different 10-2 type of seasons matter as it relates to getting to Charlotte.
And David, I don't see a scenario where the ACC anytime soon, unless they expand it, where the ACC get to your point, to the ACC getting three teams in the playoff. That just doesn't seem like a reality at this point with what the SEC and Big Ten are able to do. So I think that has to be the goal. It has to be, you got to be one of those two teams that get to the championship game and then see how it goes. But I think that has to be because I don't think if I don't see a team, if Miami would have won, I don't think if they're left out, I don't think that third place team is going to jump the second place team in the ACC. I just don't see that happening. And I think that's just the reality of it. So I think you absolutely have to be one of those top two teams and extend your season with getting into the college football playoff. But I am really interested to kind of hear the approach to it now that Miami went through it last year. A successful season. I'm very curious to hear how the players talk, the returning players, and the goals for this year. I know obviously with the addition of Carson Beck, they're hoping for a big season. And one of the things that I've mentioned too already with Carson Beck and Cam Ward essentially did everything. He essentially did everything at Miami except for winning an ACC title, getting in the championship game. That has to be the goal for Carson Beck, that it might be very hard to duplicate Cam's individual success, but getting healthy, and learning, teaching these guys essentially what it takes to get all the way to the top and really push forward to that conference championship game. I think that would be key. So I'm fascinated. The 9.5 right now, to me, when you look at it, as I mentioned, they've not went 4-0 in the final four games, and yet under Cristobal, and it's hard for me to pick one there. And I think like that Louisville, SMU, even Florida State, if they're better on the road, you can kind of see how you touched on some 9-win season type stuff. I kind of see this team right now for me, kind of in that 9-3 range. Maybe they lose to Notre Dame or a Florida, and then maybe it's almost like if you look at the schedule once again right here, almost like a one loss in each column. Essentially that Notre Dame, Florida, that first four, one of those two games, and kind of in that middle one, and then maybe late too. And also we didn't touch on Virginia Tech. That's another tricky game for me too, in terms of if they're rolling, if they kind of get things going, just that late season road game. With everything that goes on in a season, I think that's something to pay attention to. In addition to Pitt, you made great points about the Panthers.
Yeah, and it's so hard. Like in this modern era of college football, it's so hard to project what a team is going to be because teams can change overnight in the transfer portal. Miami in the spring window last year added significant difference makers that I think boosted them from a 9-win team before the spring to a 10-win team after the spring. Guys like Damian Martinez, Tyler Barron, Sam Brown. So those guys elevated things. I think Miami will also be aggressive in the spring window this year too, but so will other teams. Other teams will lose guys and gain guys, and so it is hard to project, and that's why doing maybe the win-loss game here in January is a little fruitless for me. But I do think, look, and we're seeing parity is becoming more of a thing in college football because of the portal. So you got to respect every opponent. I think I like where Miami's talent level is, the baseline of it right now, as they look to build on last year. But they got holes just like everyone else, and we'll see how they address those issues here in the offseason.
And I expect new defensive coordinator Corey Heatherman to address that, see what he has on defense in particular throughout spring ball. And as you mentioned, those were some key additions after spring football. And I think that's what all teams are going to do. See what they have in spring football, address what they need to add, and go from there. So it is fascinating. But this is great stuff, talking about the schedule, spring football just a few months away. Definitely appreciate everybody for watching. Thanks for joining me, David.
Thank you.